name is Alyssa Knox. I am an Environment and Development Planner here with the North Central Texas Council of Governments, or NCTCOG for short. I want to welcome you to our webinar, The Future of Water, 89th Texas Legislative Wrap-Up. I am moderating today. This webinar is hosted by NCTCOG and funded by the US EPA through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I want to give you a little bit of background on what NCTCOG is before we get started. We are a voluntary association of, by, and for local governments. We exist to address and assist with regional planning concerns and needs present within our 16 county jurisdiction. NCTCOG is one of 24 regional councils within the state of Texas. And as part of our water quality management planning program, we host quarterly webinars on water quality topics. If you have any ideas for future topics for webinars, please feel free to send them to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat and it's shown on your screen. It's aknox@nctcog.org. Okay. I want to go over a few housekeeping items before we get into the meat of our presentations. We're scheduled to go today until 11:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. We will hear from two presentations, then there will be limited time for questions. I will share instructions on how to submit questions later. The presentation slides and recording of this webinar will be shared with participants who registered through a follow-up email. If you didn't register but you would like to receive the follow-up email, please email me at the email in the chat. Presentation slides and the recording of the webinar will also be posted on NCTCOG's Water Resources page under the green banner titled Webinars. I'm also going to put the link to that in the chat as well. As a reminder, please keep your microphone on mute to eliminate any distractions for our presentations and our presenters when you are not asking questions or sharing a question. Today's agenda, first we'll be hearing from Julie Nargang, who will present on Stop. If you've heard this one before, it's always a water session in Texas, as well as Tom Barnett, who will present TWDB, Texas Water Development Board, updates on the 89th Texas legislation and plans for implementation. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Julie Nargang currently serves as the Executive Director for the Water Environment Association of Texas and the Texas Association of Clean Water Agencies. In this capacity, she tracks legislative and regulatory issues important to the clean water sector and advocates for good water policy rooted in sound science. She is a Bachelor of Science in Economics from Trinity University and a lifetime honorary studentship to the London School of Economics. She is an avid trail runner and gardener with two extremely spoiled rescue dogs. Love to hear that, Julie. And now, Julie, you may begin your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Elisa, and thank you, everyone at NCTCOG for having me. Really excited to be here today. And once again, it always seems like it's a water session in Texas, and this session was much like others in that capacity. So without further ado, I'll jump into the 140 days. And as a reminder, I've listed the key legislative dates on the screen, and the session kicked off this year in January, lasted for 140 days, and that is the regular session. And the last day for committee reports was back in May 24th. We did see the veto deadline come and go on June 22nd, and importantly, we saw a key veto that really ushered in the first special session that then became marked by the July 4th flooding in Kerr County. But the only date that we have left on that list of dates is the November 4th election date. And that's when all the constitutional amendments will come up for election. And as I proceed in the presentation, remember that November 4th date, because that is when Texas voters will be given the opportunity to vote on Proposition 4, which is the proposition that will allow the dedicated funding, which is the annual funding for water infrastructure and water supply projects. So once again, if you like $1 billion a year for your water infrastructure and water supply projects, vote for Proposition 4 on November 4th. All right, and sine die means indefinitely. So there's the adjournment indefinitely that we saw in June for sine die. It's the last day of regular session. And then we swiftly jumped into the special session. And just to set the stage a bit, we saw more bills filed in this legislative session that we have in any other session. We saw more than 9,000 bills filed. You'll see the breakdown on the screen. You'll also see the passage rate. We had just over 15% average passage rate, which is quite a few percentage points lower than what we usually see. We usually see good rule of thumb is around 19%, 20% passage rate, but we only saw 15% in this legislative session. We also saw nearly a record for first-year lawmakers, with 31 in the House and 3 in the Senate. So there was a lot of water education to be done moving into this regular session to get everyone up to speed and to really convey the importance of water issues in this session. And so on the screen now you see the big three, and those are the three folks that really can set the tone and the tenor of the legislative session. You see our governor on top, our lieutenant governor, and then our Speaker of the House. And Dustin Burrows, the Speaker, is the new addition to the screen, really, or to the big three. And he came up on the scene and beat out his contender in a really highly contested race in which a number of Democrats voted for him, and that really sparked the ire of a lot of Republicans, in fact. So Dustin Burrows had the crosshairs on him throughout the legislative session, but seemed to hold the House together in a way that allowed a lot of legislation to be filed and to be passed, in fact. And let's take a look at the House leadership. I'd like to go back through the leadership and the key committees that heard our water bills, because once again, just in the same way that the big three can help set the tone of tenor of the session, the entire session, the House and the Senate leadership and our key committees really are the ones that can hold up a stop sign or can collaborate and push through key pieces of legislation. So we saw Cody Harris really jump into Representative King's position as the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee and take a hold of that committee in a way that many thought would be difficult, and it is difficult. Representative King had a number of years of experience as chair, and then also, I believe, was over 2 decades in the House, if not more. So Cody Harris out of the Palestine area came in and chaired that committee, followed by Vice Chair Armando Martinez out of Weslaco. And the House Environmental Regulations Committee was chaired once again by Brooks Landgraf out of the Odessa area. And he's chaired this committee, I believe it's 3 to 4 sessions, 3 at least at this point. And so he's very familiar with the committee, the issues, and of course, representing the Odessa area, he has a number of interests in oil and gas in the state. And looking at the Senate Water Ag Rural Affairs Committee, it was no surprise that the incredibly powerful Senator Charles Perry out of the Lubbock area chaired this committee. And Charles Perry also sat on the Finance Committee as well in the Senate, which heard one of the very important bills to secure the funding for our water infrastructure and our water supply projects. So Charles Perry was the first-year lawmaker to chair this Senate Water Ag Rural Affairs Committee, but is now considered a veteran and really one of the most powerful water thinkers and water doers in the legislature outside of the governor and the lieutenant governor. And moving into a roundup of the Texas Water Caucus. Now, this is the second legislative session that we've seen a Texas Water Caucus, and this session, it was bicameral, so it crossed both sides of the House and the Senate, and it was chaired by Representative Stan Kitzman, who's a sophomore lawmaker. And it welcomed in 84 members, and its primary goals are those 3 points shown on your screen right now. And WEAT and a number of other water organizations filled in some of the educational gaps and provided presentations to a lot of the staffers during the legislative session on different issues for the Texas Water Caucus. And moving on to the water priorities that we saw, and we saw these jump onto the scene fairly early in the legislative session. We knew that we were going in with a $24 billion budget surplus, which is the second largest budget surplus that Texas has enjoyed. And so we knew we had a lot of money going in to play with. We also listened intently when Governor Abbott gave his State of the State address and talked about his legislative priorities. And on February 2nd, he listed his top legislative priorities and emergency items. And a Texas-size investment in water was listed as his number 7 priority or emergency item on his list of items to cover this legislative session. So whenever the governor announces water as one of the major priorities, you better believe that there are going to be a lot of water bills filed, and there's going to be heavy conversation around water issues. And out of priority number 7, of course, we saw SB 7 and HJR 7. So it was a series of a lucky number 7s going into the legislative session. And before we look at where we ended up, let's take a look back at where we came from in terms of water funding. And really, this legislative session is seen as an extension on the down payment provided in the previous legislative session. And with that, I mean the creation of the Texas Water Fund and the seeding of that fund with SB 28 of $1 billion. So once again, the Texas Water Fund was created and seeded with $1 billion in the previous legislative session. And you'll see on the screen the different buckets, funding buckets under the Texas Water Fund. So the Texas Water Fund acts as a kind of a umbrella fund through which money is deposited and then moves through the Texas Water Fund into those various other funding buckets and allocated and moved around by the Texas Water Development Board. And so we saw the Texas Water Fund as a new fund, the Water Awareness Fund as a new funding bucket, and the new Water Supply Fund. And famously, the new Water Supply Fund was much debated and much anticipated, and really came from Senator Perry's idea of the water supply deficit that Texas will incur in the future, and how to really meet that deficit, that water supply deficit. And so he had a very narrow definition for what new water is and what could be funded, what types of projects could be funded with that new water supply fund bucket. And according to SB 28, the only water projects that could be funded were desalination projects, so both marine and brackish groundwater, ASR projects, the use of produced water outside of the oil and gas industry, and transportation of the water made available by the 3 projects listed above. So that was the original Texas Water Fund as established by the previous legislative session. Now, moving into Senate Bill 7, which made a few changes to the Texas Water Fund, in fact. And the House and the Senate versions differed, but generally agreed upon all of those items and kind of coalesced around those items in the dark blue. And we saw the addition of the Flood Infrastructure Fund under the Texas Water Fund. Previously, that was a different fund that did not come under the Texas Water Fund. It was folded under. And then we saw the development of the Texas Water Fund Advisory Committee, which really kind of pulled the advisory committees together for SWIFT, for flood funding, and pulled them really under one roof. That was the Texas Water Advisory Committee. And another piece that's incredibly important to SB 7 is that added wastewater prioritization within the bill in two different ways. It added wastewater prioritization for infrastructure projects for rural and cities of less than 150,000. And previously in the Texas Water Fund, it only had water infrastructure projects for rural and cities less than 150. So it adds wastewater to that. And a last minute, really 11th hour amendment added a study, and this is key. So Senate Bill 7, an amendment added a study of how to incorporate wastewater funding into the state water plan. And so really what this is looking at is how do we include another funding bucket for wastewater? And we'll touch on that in a bit, but um, it's an interesting amendment and really has a lot of profound implications for wastewater funding in the future. And then we saw the amendment to HB 500, which is a finance bill. In fact, it's the budget bill, but that is how we understood the funding and finance and allocation for Senate Bill 7 that was written into HB 500. And so the amendment for HB 500 really sets the allocation for Senate Bill 7, which is 50% of that money goes to new water supply projects and SWIFT. And so SWIFT are, of course, the projects that are agreed upon under the state water plan. And then 50% goes to the Texas Water Fund in general, where the Texas Water Development Board can determine the allocation. So it's a 50-50 split between new water SWIFT and the rest of the funding buckets under Texas Water Fund. Okay, so looking forward, so the Texas Water Fund in the 89th, let's break down that state budget bill or the supplemental appropriations bill, HJR 7, and Senate Bill 7. So with the state budget bill, so we actually see about $175 billion of new money coming in under the Texas Water Development Board to be dispersed in a number of different ways. And so 881 million of that is really existing money that was in the Texas Water Fund that's moved from the Texas Water Fund to the Texas Water Development Board and will no doubt be moved back to the Texas Water Fund. And then we saw 130 million to be used for matching drawdowns for the state revolving fund. So that's Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And then we saw 581 million in earmarks. And so during the legislative session, there was a lot of talk of one-time infusement of 2.5 billion into the Texas Water Fund. And really, when it's all said and done, that's looking like 175 billion or $1.75 billion of new money into the Texas Water Fund. So not quite 2.5, but really 1.75 billion of new money. And so again, that's the finance side, according to the supplemental appropriations bill. So let's look at HJR 7 and SB 7. So HJR 7, filed by Harris and Perry, that is that's the dream. That is the annual funding of $1 billion dropped into the Texas Water Fund. And that will not happen unless Proposition 4 passes on November 4th, because it's a constitutional dedicated funding, so it needs to be a constitutional amendment, and it allows up to $1 billion per year from 2027 to 2047 to be dropped into the Texas Water Fund. And SB 7, again, that was the final bill that passed. That was the enabling legislation that amends the Texas Water Fund duties and oversights, and it added the wastewater amendment, and it did a number of other things that we will jump into right now, in fact. The final of HJR is shown on your screen. And the big piece to remember here is that it is annual dedicated funding that will not happen unless the voters agree to it through Proposition 4. A couple of pieces kind of in the finer print of things is that it can't be used to fund the transportation of groundwater that is not brackish. And the bill defines brackish groundwater. It goes back to SB 7. It defines brackish groundwater as anything with more than 3,000 TDS. Now, HGR 7, so the allocation of that 1 billion can be suspended under states of declared disaster, under a state of declared disaster. So there is kind of a ripcord there for the legislature in the state. And again, it comes back to the allocation. And with HGR 7, there is no allocation for the first 10 years. So the Texas Water Development Board receives that money into the Texas Water Fund and can push it out through any of those funding buckets in whatever allocation it feels is necessary based on the funding applications, state water plan, things like that. But after the first 10 years, the allocation split mirrors that of SB 7, which is 50% to Swift and New Water and 50% to the rest of the Texas Water Fund. And with this, I really wanted to set the stage, and I snipped out the key piece of the amendment for wastewater funding that again was added to SB 7 at the 11th hour. So we're going to play that now.
Julie, you're still muted.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you for bearing with me while I played that video, folks. And what I really wanted to show, not that Trent Ashby laid out Cody Harris's bill, but which that was Trent Ashby, that was not Cody Harris, but that you know, in that important chamber, at that level of discussion, we actually saw lawmakers say wastewater 3 times in a high priority, significant bill, which is quite a departure and a major change and a major, I would say, awareness, new awareness of wastewater issues and the need for funding. So I want to jump into that amendment just briefly. And it recognizes the significant gap of funding between water supply projects, water infrastructure, and wastewater infrastructure issues. It addressed the holistic or lack of statewide planning for clean water in the state of Texas. And when I say clean water, I'm going back to the Clean Water Act. which is the underpinning of wastewater regulation in the state. So we can think of our wastewater treatment plants as plants that treat wastewater and turn it into clean water. So we have a statewide water plan. We have a statewide flood plan, but we don't have a statewide clean water plan or wastewater treatment plan. So this amendment really addresses that issue. It doesn't provide any resolution, but it addresses it in a meaningful way. And once again, I want to impart that the wastewater treatment is a water supply issue. How well and how much funding we have to treat our wastewater is absolutely a water supply issue and cannot be separated from it. So once again, just the three key things that amendment asks the Texas Water Development Board to do is look at the feasibility and practicability of incorporating planning for wastewater infrastructure into the state water plan process. Outline the statutory changes necessary, and so outline what kind of legislation would be necessary to make this change, and then provide that report back to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House, as well as the water committees by December 1st, 2026. Okay, so moving back to the meat of Senate Bill 7, and it made some tweaks to that narrow definition of new water that we saw coming out of the 88th, and it added water reuse, so water and wastewater reuse to the definition of new water. So reuse projects can be funded under the new water supply bucket. It also added the purchase of out-of-state water and water rights. So I know there was a lot of talk in the last session of purchasing water rights from Arkansas or Louisiana. And this really creates a little bit more of the framework to allow that to happen. So we can purchase out-of-state water and water rights. And then it would include some reservoir projects in new water supply projects. So, for example, those that are shovel ready and that have their 404 permit secured. And so moving on. So what does that Okay, so what does the Texas Water Fund look like today in the 89th after the passage of SB 7? Well, as you can see, it's a little bit more crowded in there, a few more funding buckets under that Texas Water Fund bucket. Everything you see on the screen is in the final bill and did roll under the Texas Water Fund. The color coding just speaks to if it came from the House or the Senate or both. And so we see EDAP and Ag Water Conservation Fund were both rolled under, as well as the Flood Infrastructure Fund. And again, just a repeat of around 1.7 billion of new money going into the Texas Water Fund. You see the allocation for 50% to the New Water Supply Fund and 50% to the Texas Water Fund, or excuse me, 50% to New Water Supply and or SWIFT, and 50% to all of the others in the Texas Water Fund. And this was the signing ceremony for SB 7. It was a big to-do in Lubbock, and there were a lot of folks present. And as you can imagine, it was a huge win for the state of Texas, and Governor Abbott invited a lot of folks to sit and be part of that signing ceremony and be in that picture. And one key piece that has impacted the North Texas area and will continue to impact all of Texas is the study in science and understanding of relative risk in PFAS. And there were quite a few bills filed that spoke to that. None of them passed, but the three key bills are shown on your screen. The top one would have been a de facto land application ban of biosolids in the state of Texas, and would have required the daily testing of 18 different constituents of PFAS in all biosolids, and that testing to be sent to the Office of the State Chemist. It was heard in committee once and never voted on and did not get a second hearing. It was heard late in the session, which usually means that it's not a priority bill for that committee. The two other bills made it quite a bit further, but neither one of those passed as well. And one would have been a study bill to understand both relative risk and relative amounts of PFAS in key pieces of manufactured goods, as well as water bodies and equipment material. And the other would have banned PFAS in practice firefighting foam, because as we know, with the continued manufacturing of items with PFAS in it, we are continuing to put PFAS in our environment. And the hearing for HB 1674 was a lengthy one. It went on for over 3 hours, and there were 73 co-authors on that bill, which is a huge amount of co-authors in the House. And we had 34 register for the bill, 33 against, so a fairly even split, and quite a lengthy hearing. Additional wastewater priority bills shown on your screen. Let's see here, looks like HB 3333 is duplicated, but that is the same bill, and it did in fact pass and was signed by the governor as effective on the 1st, and it prohibits issuing new permits of discharge into certain segments of one of the pristine rivers in Texas, in fact. And so it seeks to protect some of the Devil's River. And then HB 49 is a bill that seeks to encourage the reuse of produced water, and it extends liability protection to oil and gas companies who reuse the produced water. Senate Bill 2885 is an interesting one. A lot of folks like it quite a bit. It is a definition change, but should allow ASR projects to be made a little bit easier, in fact, and it allows the continuance of an ASR project that is part of Temple's the Temple area state water plan project to bring water supply to Temple, Texas. Additional funding bills shown on your screen. The interesting one about the groundwater science research bill, it did not pass. The bill itself did not pass, but the study did receive funding, which is kind of the best of both worlds, because it doesn't have the narrow parameters of a bill passing, but the science in the study is in fact funded, so that will continue. And additional priority bills, water service and growth. The Garrity's bill was a high priority bill that was pretty interesting. And Garrity's is a representative over the Bastrop area, so a little bit west of Austin. And a lot of their groundwater is pumped and used in other municipalities. And those municipalities were seeing significant water loss after the pumping of that groundwater. And so Garrity's, and based on the ask of some folks in the community, said, hey, listen, if you're going to pump groundwater from a certain area, we will require that you be penalized, and take a look at that water loss threshold and your mitigation plan to do it. So essentially it was saying large cities that pump groundwater really need to make sure that they're not losing significant amounts of that groundwater that they're pumping and moving over to another municipality. And a few of the other high priority bills are shown on your screen as well. We can clarify any of those during the Q&A. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those, but they will be sent in slides to you following the webinar. Now, the two notice and licensing bills that we were tracking heavily did not, or excuse me, one of them did pass, the bottom one did not. top one is really a relaxing of the step-up fee to renewal. So to renew your expired occupational license, and of course that covers water and wastewater operator licenses, but it allows you to renew it for 1 year, and if it expires, it gives you an extended amount of time to renew it instead of, I believe it was the 30 days, or perhaps, yeah, it was 30 days previous, and now there's a 90-day limit. Okay. Cybersecurity bills. The really kind of headliner bill here is the Capri Leon bill, the HB 150, and it created the Cybersecurity Command Center in Texas to both detect and ward off cybersecurity threats. And that is it'll be operated, I believe, out of UT San Antonio, but it is part of the University Texas program. And additional groundwater bills, again, Garrity's, you'll see quite a few in here on the next slide, filed by Garrity's. These groundwater bills were all filed. Let's see here, the top one did pass, and it increased civil penalties by groundwater conservation districts. Okay, and here's the series of Garrity's groundwater bills that did indeed pass, except for the top one. And that one failed on essentially a procedural note. And I want to, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek slide, obviously, but there were quite a few mud and package plant bills that popped up this legislative session. And really with those, what we see are issues that are happening with pocket plants or muds that are being formed really to address certain developments. And a lot of communities and a lot of folks in the area and downriver are having issues with some of those package plants, and would like to see really a more regional approach to wastewater treatment, instead of the proliferation of muds and package plants to really treat our wastewater. So we saw a lot of these filed. We'll continue to see this as an issue. This is no doubt one of the reasons that wastewater funding, that amendment for potential wastewater funding out of SWIFT, which means that it needs to be included in the state water plan, was added to SB 7, is really to address this issue of muds, package plants, and the lack of regionalization that some lawmakers see. And finally, we did see quite a few vetoed bills. One of these was Garrity's, and then we did see an Eckhart bill that is really being debated in the special session right now, the second special session that started on Friday afternoon. And this one nearly passed, but it became what we call a Christmas tree, and there were a couple of amendments and things hung on it at the last minute that really made the governor veto it. And finally, what's next in the short term, medium term, and long term of the legislative session? We do see the special session, the first special session, which started and it ended on Friday. And Friday morning, I believe, and then we saw the governor turn around and call for the next special session, which began on, I believe it was 2 p.m. last Friday as well. So we will see that second special session go for 30 days. We saw 18 different items included on the special session. And obviously emergency preparedness and flood planning, or preparedness rather, was on it to address the tragic July 4th flooding, as well as some other items, including redistricting and hemp regulation. And finally, once again, in order to have the $1 billion dropped into the Texas Water Fund from 2027 to 2047, the voters of Texas must vote yes on Proposition 4 on November 4th. And with that, I will close. I like to have pictures of my cute, fluffy, and spoiled dogs, Mary on the left and Spencer on the right, because they are cute and fluffy and sweet. And sometimes talking about Texas politics is not so cute and fluffy and sweet. But with that, I'll hand over the mic and happy to answer questions during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Julie. Also, your children are adorable. Thanks for sharing. Like Julie said, we'll do some Q&A. I'm already seeing some questions in the chat, so looking forward to addressing those. But I want to reserve time for our next speaker, Tom Barnett. With over 15 years of experience in water supply planning and infrastructure project development, Tom serves as the executive office at the Texas Water Development Board. In his role, he provides strategic leadership and guidance to communities and stakeholders all across Texas, helping them navigate the complexities of securing financial assistance for critical infrastructure projects in water, wastewater, and flood mitigation. Tom has helped advance resilient and sustainable infrastructure solutions that address both immediate needs and long-term planning goals. He brings a deep understanding of state and federal funding programs, regulatory frameworks, and collaborative planning processes that support equitable access to water resources throughout the state of Texas. Now, Tom, you may take control and begin your presentation.
All right, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I wish I had included a picture of my sweet dog in my presentation. I do have a picture of her in my office when she was a puppy in the snow up in Iowa. But yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Just a quick overview of our agency. Let me see to take control. Okay. Yeah, so the Texas Water Development Board was founded in 1957. Just some background for y'all, in case there's folks that are not familiar. We were founded in 1957 in a response to the devastating drought of the 1950s, which fundamentally reshaped the state. That drought was punctuated by historic flooding that was seen across the state. We've kind of become familiar with this pattern over the years with Texas climate of sustained droughts punctuated by catastrophic floods. And our agency is really positioned to address both of those issues. So we are charged with leading the state forward in water science, long-range planning, and providing financial assistance. You can think of us as an infrastructure bank for not just water, but also for wastewater and flood. We administer the regional water planning process and also the new regional flood planning process. And for financial assistance, we administer various state and federal financial assistance programs to address water, wastewater, and flood control issues also. The TWDB maintains a AAA credit rating that we're able to pass on to our customers, which are political subdivisions, including municipalities, water districts, nonprofit water supply corporations, to achieve low-cost financing of projects. And depending on the program, we're able to offer subsidized interest rates, different financing structures, principal forgiveness and grants, and also technical assistance. We have some new technical assistance programs for asset management development for small systems and water utility technical assistance more generally that are we expect to emphasize more in the coming years. So just kind of a plug. So we have great staff around the state. We're broken up into regional teams, and if you're with a municipality or another entity and you have questions about our programs, feel free to reach out and I can connect you to the appropriate folks. But we're here today to talk about the recent Texas legislative session, particularly related to the funding of water infrastructure and what we're doing to implement that legislation here at the board. So I will start moving forward in that direction. As Julie queued up, so a lot of this, there's going to be a little bit of duplication with what Julie shared. before, but I'll try not to bog us down much. So as Julie said, this was a historic water session. We knew that going into it. And with the February 2nd, when the governor announced his top priorities for the legislative session and his State of the State address, water was on that list. There's a tremendous need, both for developing new water supplies, and there's a need that's just out the door for rehabbing existing infrastructure. Just to give you an idea, our most recent SRF solicitations for drinking water and clean water were both about 10 times oversubscribed. So let's say we had $400 million annually to commit to projects in both of those programs. We got about $5 billion of project information forms. So those are projects entities have they're ready to move forward on right now. We have like $10 billion of demand annually in both of those programs combined. So the need for additional funding in the water space is tremendous. Like I said, both for new water supplies, like programs like SWIFT and the new water supply program, but also the SRS, which are kind of the bread and butter for water infrastructure, for like rehab and of existing infrastructure. So as Julie said, the governor stated the need for a Texas-sized investment in water, and we did achieve that in this session. So principally, that was done through Senate Bill 7, House Joint Resolution 7, and HB 500. And I'm going to spend a little more time on each of those here. This is just a recap of that, the list of those 3 bills and their sponsors. Just also wanted to note that this was in our agency's legislative priorities report. It was our #1 goal for the legislative session, was this long-term sustainable financing mechanism. So first, we'll just quickly summarize House Bill 500. So that is the comprehensive supplemental appropriations bill across state government and general revenue to address a range of needs in basically all sectors of the state. Within that was the 2.5 billion that Julie mentioned. That was kind of the one-time starting investment. So of that 2.5, which was really about 1.75, because of the second bullet here, the 881 million of that 2.5 was a reauthorization of money that was put into the Texas Water Fund in the last legislative session. So the new money is that first bullet, $1.038 billion from general revenue to the Water Development Board for water infrastructure and supply projects. So our board has pretty broad discretion to direct this funding into existing programs as we try to identify that to be the most put those dollars in the most impactful way we can direct those to our programs to serve the state. So we're working on that, and I'll touch on that a bit more later in the presentation. And then the third bullet, there was almost $600 million of what you could call legislatively directed spending or earmarks for 34 specific local projects. And those projects are outlined. You can see them in the Senate Bill 1. And those were for water, wastewater, and flood mitigation projects around the state too. So it's kind of an interesting list. So that funding will flow through our agency, but not with the full oversight of what we give to the financial assistance programs that we oversee, where we approve submittals during the planning, design, and construction phases and close out the project. This is more pass-through dollars going directly to those entities from the legislature. Lastly, House Bill 500 included matching funds for the state revolving fund programs. So again, that's clean water SRF for mostly for wastewater projects, and the drinking water SRF for water projects. This funding is extremely important. So the SRF programs are federal programs, so we get those we get initial dollars from the feds, but we have to provide state matches, and these matching funds allow us to increase the capacity of those programs, and also we leverage those dollars through bond sales to kind of support those funds and get further down those lists. Because as I said earlier, those programs are very oversubscribed. So typically we can only get to like the top 10% or so of the projects on the each year's intended use plan. So we're hoping with this funding and other parts of this historic investment in water that we'll be able to start getting further down those SRF lists going forward. So next, House HJR 7.
Hey, Tom, I just need to stop you for a quick second. There's a discussion in the chat. Some people are saying they're seeing slide 41 versus 42. We should be on 43 now. So if you are seeing anything besides 43, sorry, people are seeing different slides. So for the audience, if you're seeing anything besides slide 43, there may be an opportunity for you to click sync to presenter. If you had clicked through or seen anything else, someone said they left and rejoined, and that fixed the issue as well. So you may need to just resync your slides so that they stay along with Tom, because some people are on the correct slide and some people aren't. So just a way to kind of keep us all on the same page. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay. I think, sorry about that. For whatever reason, I couldn't really hear what you said, Alyssa, like it was very choppy. But I'm seeing now, I'm not exactly sure where we went off the rails, but I'll just kind of recap. I'll just kind of look back through those slides.
You're free to continue from 43.
Okay. Okay, well, yeah, if we have any questions, we can address those in the Q&A. Okay, so HJR 7, that is the first of its kind dedicated revenue stream for water infrastructure in Texas, which is a huge deal. And of course, that's subject to voter consideration in November. So that is Proposition 4. And at the state agency, we can't, advocate for that legislation like other organizations can, but it is extremely important that obviously it's important legislation for everyone to consider. So this would provide up to $1 billion per year over 20 years from fiscal year 27 through 47, which would collect sales tax revenue above $46.5 billion. So this funding, in addition to voter approval, largely depends on the performance of the economy and sales tax revenue staying above that level. So next, we can discuss Senate Bill 7. So I'm going to lay this out over the next 3 slides because this was a huge piece of legislation. And as Julie said, it expands upon Senate Bill 28 from last session, which gave birth to the Texas Water Fund. So that Senate Bill 7 really expands upon that. So the first thing it does, it expands financing eligibility for under the Texas Water Fund. So it adds the Flood Infrastructure Fund, the Economically Distressed Areas Program, and the Agricultural Water Conservation Fund. Those are now under the umbrella of the Texas Water Fund, so future funding can be directed into those programs, which is very important. And then it also adds additional project types to the New Water Supply for Texas Fund. So this was Senator Perry's initiative that he led for the development of like new and innovative water supply sources as we look to future generations, and existing surface water and groundwater is very much already allocated. We have like over 1,500 new people moving to the state every day. If we look at state water plan projections, we're expecting to need to provide water for 20 million more Texans in future decades. And there's also, we expect increased demand for industrial water use. So there's going to be a need for new water resources. So the New Water Supply for Texas Fund is meant to sort of inspire more development in those spaces and create a funding mechanism to finance them. So from the last legislative session, as Julie said, the New Water Supply Fund was very narrowly limited to brackish and marine desal, ASR, produced water, and conveyance of those projects. With Senate Bill 7, the New Water Supply for Texas Fund, or the NEWT as we're calling it here, is expanded to include water and wastewater reuse, acquisition of out-of-state water rights, and shovel-ready reservoirs. So those reservoirs where they have their permits and land acquisition ready to go, those can now be funded under the New Water Supply for Texas Fund. Next, other things that Senate Bill 7 does, it increases our agency's bonding authority for EDAP to $100 million annually. I believe it's increased from 50, and it raises the overall program grant to loan ratio from 70% to 90%. So that piece of it kind of brings EDAP back to where it used to be, to allow up to 90% grant for eligible projects. EDAP is for it's kind of a limited scope to the EDAP program for like providing like first time water and wastewater to new developments, or just places that developments that historically colonias, developments that sprung up around the state that didn't have access to sufficient infrastructure to protect public health and safety. So that's largely what EDAP is directed to, address those kinds of needs. As Julie said, wastewater is was a major part of Senate Bill 7 also. So it adds wastewater as a priority under the Texas Water Fund for projects targeting deteriorating or deficient infrastructure. So it will allow us to direct more fund for wastewater rehab projects. And like I said, with the Clean Water SRF being oversubscribed, it will allow us to further chip away at the tremendous need that's out there for wastewater rehab. The last bullet, it also directs our agency to conduct a study to assess what it would look like to add wastewater to the regional water planning process. So that is something we're also going to be looking at. And the third bullet, it just kind of places more emphasis on technical assistance to access our funding programs. We anticipate adding more funding into our existing technical assistance programs that I mentioned before, to be able to work with more communities and kind of expand the reach of those programs to help more entities access our funding. And another piece of Senate Bill 7 that has not been mentioned yet, it charges our agency with facilitating what's being termed conveyance coordination. So this is sort of an expansion of our efforts in regional water planning, and also project development when we get applications in the door. It charges our agency with facilitating planning amongst project sponsors and stakeholders like TxDOT, utility providers, and other entities to sort of work together to develop, to kind of encourage regional scaling of projects. So for large, you could think of just large conveyances, how to make those more effective and efficient by regionalizing them and reducing the need for using eminent domain. So this is something that we're developing implementation plans for. We will be developing through staff will be hiring and contractors will be developing technical standards, guidance, and best management practices for the transport of water and how to encourage the development of excess capacity and ensure interconnectivity and integration between those pieces of infrastructure. So that is something you'll be hearing more about in the regional water planning process. And like I said, if we get, starting September 1st, when we get applications in the door for large conveyance projects, we're required to consider these things and make sure that our applicants are considering them too. So this will be something that'll should be pretty interesting as we get that off the ground in the months to come. Next, I know we want to leave time for questions, so I'm almost wrapping up here. I just wanted to mention 3 other bills that did pass that we think are notable. There's a lot of other bills that are notable, but I just highlighted these 3. So the first is HB 29, and that requires detailed water loss validation for just the 5 largest cities in Texas. So utilities with more than 150,000 service connections are affected with HB 29. But it really speaks to the importance of water loss mitigation and the third-party water loss audit validation process that has started just recently, just this year. So basically, when water loss audits are required to be submitted to the Water Development Board, they also need to be validated. So this is just something to be aware of, I guess, for all municipalities going forward, that there's for those required to submit water loss audits, they will also need to go through this validation process. And the goal of that is to just kind of get better, learn more information year after year, and help identify what's real water loss, what's apparent water loss, and just as a way to hopefully make headway across the state on that issue. Next is Senate Bill 1261. So that Julie mentioned this briefly also, but that extends the loan terms that we're allowed to offer under the SWIFT program to 40 years for large-scale water supply projects. So this just applies to basically huge projects over $750 million. And it's just intended to enhance the financial viability of those long-term projects. And finally, House Bill 2078. This makes very significant updates to the joint groundwater planning process. And there's a lot of details, but basically the legislator directed they saw the need for more transparency and accountability for achieving desired future conditions in groundwater management areas across the state. So basically, for the DFCs, look out 50 years for the condition that we want the aquifers to look like in the future. And this bill introduces interim 10-year DFC values, and it kind of enhances the explanatory requirements for helping everybody understand in plain language what those DFCs mean. And I think we've already seen in the special session there is a lot of legislative interest in looking at the management of groundwater in Texas. So this is kind of just a very important space to be aware of in the special session, and looking forward to the next legislative session. Okay, so I mentioned I would talk more on our implementation plans for some of this legislation. We are continuing disbursements from the first round of funding from the Texas Water Fund. So that $1 billion that we were given to start the Texas Water Fund last legislative session, we've committed about $703 million of that funding. A lot of that has been through some state programs. We were directed last session to target water loss mitigation projects. So we did that with some state funded programs and really got some tremendous good financing packages to entities of various sizes throughout the state through those programs for water loss mitigation. We've also used that funding on specific high risk, high need projects for entities that were unable to get or just didn't have the financing capabilities to work through our programs or obtain financing elsewhere. That first $1 billion also, we started the statewide public awareness campaigns. So we're working with the Texas Water Foundation on that. And we've kind of used, don't mess with Texas is kind of that was a big impactful thing for littering and protecting the environment back decades ago. We're sort of using that as inspiration. We want to think big on what a statewide public awareness campaign for water could look like. So we're working on that. And that first $1 billion, we've also directed that money into some of our existing programs for bond leveraging, so more funding into the SWIFT. We're also working on the allocation plan for the $1.038 billion of discretionary dollars that was in HB 500. We're also developing a plans for how we're going to implement the new Water Supply for Texas program. So that involves developing rules. And we have roughly about $200 million from the first round of water fund funding for that program, and then additional funding will hopefully go into that program with the after Prop 4 starting in 2027. So we're making plans for what that program is going to look like, if we're going to kind of line it up with SWIFT in one solicitation, or if it's going to be more of a standalone program. And as I said, we're working on conveyance coordination, that new initiative from SB 7. And then we're also involved right now in the special sessions. We've been responding to the joint select committees for flood response in Texas, participating in those hearings and responding to legislation regarding flood early warning systems and things like that. So it's been a busy year at our agency, working on this, the regular session and then the special sessions after the July 4th floods. So I think I'll stop there and we can move into the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was really informative. Yes, so it is now time for question and discussion. I see a lot of good questions in the chat already, which we'll get to in just a second. Additionally, if you want to use the raise your hand function at the top of your screen, and we'll call on you and invite you to unmute and verbally share your question. You're welcome to do that as well. But let's get to the ones we already see in the chat. There was a question. It looked like it got clarified early in the presentation. The discretionary fund was listed as 1.38 billion, and it should be 1.083 billion. I just wanted to clarify that number. Is that correct?
It's 1.038.
Okay, gotcha. Wonderful, thank you. Larry had a question. How does Texas Water Development Board take into account increasing extreme weather intensity as reported by the Texas climatologists into their long-range planning?
Sure. So our regional water planning process, it's largely based on the 1950s drought of record. So we initially utilized that as sort of the baseline that's the worst case scenario for what a drought could be in Texas and what our reservoirs could look like under those conditions. However, we recognize that with just the population growth and increasing demands on all of those resources, that could look very different in the future. We have been, the Sunset Commission directed us to work with the state climatologist to assess how future climate may affect water availability for surface water and groundwater. And the kind of the uncertainty that's around there for new precipitation trends and climate outlooks. So we are awaiting that advisory report from the state climatologist on what that'll look like. And that will be delivered to the regional water planning groups and the regional flood planning groups for their consideration in the next round of planning. So we are working right with the state climatologist as part of our process.
Excellent. Thank you. Julie, 2 questions came in for you. The first one is, you had mentioned that Texas does not have a clean water plan, but there is a water quality management plan created and administered by TCEQ. And the person was wondering if you could discuss a little bit of the differences between the WQMP and the concept of a clean water plan.
Sure. Yeah. So the concept of a clean water plan is more holistic, regional, would mirror the flood planning or the state water planning process, whereby those entities would come together and use previous MGD and population growth rates, and perhaps even, AI data centers that will come on board and understand holistically all of the users and what the potential need would be based on that, based on their future growth. So, what have we seen in terms of users in the past? What does the MGD look like? Are there regulatory issues coming down the pike that we need to solve for? And what do those upgrades look like? And then the key piece here is the financial component. What do those upgrades look like vis-a-vis how much financing do we need to make that happen regionally so that we protect the water bodies of Texas? Now, the water quality management plan is more of a regulatory approach to understanding what the water body health is point in time. And it's done, I believe, quarterly, and it's really used to inform what TIPD's permit limits should be. So when you're issuing permits to wastewater treatment plants, the water quality management plan is used in part to help inform what limits should be placed on the discharge permits. And that's vastly different than how do we plan for our future wastewater needs and how do we plan to protect clean water in the future.
Mm-hmm. I know they're updated annually because we just submitted ours to TCEQ for this year. Julie, also for you, how has the limitation of city annexation and authority within ETJs affected water and wastewater service outside of cities? It seems these limitations almost promote the creation of more districts, et cetera, and the use of packaged wastewater plants.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with the attendee on that. That's really getting outside of my wheelhouse, but from what I know, it is becoming increasingly difficult to annex or bring in kind of those unincorporated areas. And when you make it easier to develop these quasi-political bodies that really pop up just to address certain utility functions and needs, then you incentivize, the proliferation of the packaged plants and the MUDs and things like that. When you make it harder to do one thing, bringing them into a city or an area, and you make it easier to do another, to pop up plants to quickly make sure that a development has treatment, then the incentivization is going in the wrong direction in terms of regionalization of wastewater treatment. So yes, I totally agree with the attendee on that point, although it is a bit outside of my policy wheelhouse.
Thank you. For Tom, a question came in. Will there be a call for applications in the near future for the new water supply for Texas funding? And if so, do you know when?
Yes, there likely will be. Like I said, we have about $200 million available from the first iteration of Texas Water Fund funding for that, and we're developing the implementation plans for how we're going to roll that out. So we've been discussing those in our board work sessions, which are open to the public, and we're still developing those plans on whether we're going to tie it in with our next SWIFT solicitation, which would happen, we open that up typically like in December. Or if we're going to have a separate solicitation just for new water supply projects, and that would likely occur sometime in early 2026. So I would just say to kind of keep paying attention. You can sign up on our website and join our mailing list and get updates whenever we get like whenever we have announcements related to our financial assistance programs. You can choose to stay in the know that way, or just give us a call, but just be expecting those to roll out pretty soon.
Great, that'll be exciting. Last question from the chat: will the new water supply program utilize financing similar to SWIFT or matching grants?
Good question. I would just say that that's still being determined. There's a lot of different ways to set up the program. So our board is still kind of deliberating how best we're going to kind of set up those financing structures. Really, I mean, the amount we have available right now, 200 million, is not a really big amount for a lot of these kind of innovative projects are pretty high dollar projects. So with $200 million, we might only be able to fund, a small piece. Like we could try to fund the planning phase of a lot of them, or all that funding could just go to a couple of high dollar projects. So we're kind of trying to strike the balance and trying to think about the best way to maybe like kickstart several of those projects. So I would just say to be determined exactly how we're going to do that.
Okay. There are no other questions in the chat. Are there any other questions? Julie, I saw you had your hand raised. You were going to add to that?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna kind of add what I know to that, and obviously things change. But I know when SB 28 originally passed, that they were very explicit about there not being grants with the new water supply fund. And so I'm not sure exactly what the attendee is. They said matching grants, but I know that grants initially were off the table in terms of new water supply funding.
Thanks, that's good insight. Any other questions? I think this has been really helpful and informative. Thankful you guys are able to answer some of these details. Here's a question. Are clean water plans going to be included in the Texas Water Fund?
Oh, well, I certainly hope so in the future. There's not a clean water plan yet. There's no mechanism, there's no framework to do the plan. There's no funding yet for it. But what we do is we have the door open. And we have a conversation on the table, and we have a legislative mandate to look at the possibility of how we incorporate clean water planning into the state water planning process. And what that means is that if it's incorporated in the state water planning process, then it could be a grab at that funding bucket of SWIFT. So there are a lot of steps yet to be taken, but ultimately the hope is that a clean water plan could be funded through the Texas Water Fund and most likely pointed at the SWIFT funding bucket.
Okay. There's a question about copy of slides. Slides will be shared with everyone who is registered. If you haven't registered, my email is in the chat. I'll put it again. Please feel free to shoot me an email and I will add you to the list. Okay. Seeing as no other questions, we will go ahead and start wrapping up. I'm going to put a link in the chat that will provide you with a brief survey that will give you that will help give us feedback on today's webinar. We'd love to hear your ideas, and this will help plan out for future webinars. As I said, we do these webinars quarterly, so all of your feedback really makes a difference. I will note there is a question regarding PFAS, and then we'll go on. Beyond the potential land application ban legislation discussed earlier, are there other legislative efforts to start regulate PFAS in drinking water, water supply, and wastewater discharge?
Yeah, I know that I come from mostly a wastewater policy background. So I know that PFAS in drinking water is being looked at right now, and that there were 4 PFAS constituents that they were going through the process of putting limits on for drinking water. And I believe 2 of those were turned back recently under the Trump administration, in that they were needing more time on the science side of that. But now shifting to wastewater, there's no legislation currently banning any type of PFAS in wastewater discharge, but there is the PFAS roadmap, which was a potential 5-year plan, I believe, or multi-year plan, let's just put it that way, that came out at the end of the Trump administration. Trump won, and was really fortified during Biden's administration. And the major piece or pieces that we've hurdled over in that are the 200 largest POTWs, so publicly owned treatment works in the United States, were given a form that they needed to fill out, where they needed to talk about their effluent and potential receiving streams, and then the next form will require them to test for PFAS. So it's really the science gathering stage of things, understanding what POTWs are taking in PFAS and what that looks like. In terms of legislating the ban in Texas, that was the effort of the last legislative session. There are many states that are legislating different control mechanisms, including Michigan. That approach seems reasonable, and it really looks at how you limit the discharge of PFAS from industrial waste to be received by wastewater treatment plants to then treat. And so that's looking at PFAS being controlled and effluent limit guidelines in the pre-treatment part of wastewater treatment. So where wastewater treatment plants go in and put standards on what industrial waste they can receive. And that's the Michigan type approach, and that's what we're looking at now in terms of what could be scalable as far as an interim guideline and guidance issued by the EPA, which we'd like to see some sort of interim guidance while they're moving through the multi-year long stages of understanding the regulation. Sorry if that was long-winded. It's a big question. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to go out of order, but I just want to make sure everyone's questions got addressed that asked. So thank you so much for that. As I was saying, the survey is in the chat. It's also available on your screen. You should be able to click it right there to take the survey and provide feedback. So thank you so much for that. I want to give a plug for our Water for North Texas online library, which has resources related to today's topic, as well as a variety of other topics that are related to water quality and water supply. We have everything from podcasts, webinars from outside organizations, reports, case studies. We just added a bunch of back to school kind of curriculum ideas for your K through 12 folks to advance water education within the state. So please feel free to take a look at that and check that out to see if that meets your water resources needs. As a reminder, I'm going to email out the presentation slides and a link to the presentation as well. The recording, it will be up on NCTCOG's Environment and Development YouTube channel for your viewing. If you didn't RSVP, please just email me and I'll add you to the list, like I said. And I want to thank again Tom and Julie for joining us, taking the time to share their expertise and their knowledge today. And thank you so much to everyone who attended to discuss the outcomes of this really important legislative session. And you have a great rest of your day. The webinar is now over. Thank you.
Thanks,
Melissa.
Thanks.